What is up? Welcome to No Punt Intended, presented by Club Fantasy. For weeks, we've been talking about free agency and lessons we learned from 2025. It is time to really start focusing on 2026. And when it's this early in the year, that means one very specific thing: Dynasty. And while we are not the best Dynasty players in the world, we are friends with a lot of them. And we like to invite them on for what we call the intro to Dynasty. And I have to tell you, of all of the show sheets I've read for this specific episode, I have never been more blown away by what we've put together. And we have a great guest to walk you through it. Let's get into it. What is up? Welcome to No Punt Intended, presented by Club Fantasy. No Joe Zolo yet again tonight. I am your host, Ryan Weiss. With me, as always, Joshua Hudson. And Josh, it's time to talk Dynasty.
Well, let's be honest. When we pivoted to Thursday night, I kind of knew this was going to happen because of the topic of this episode, which is all about analytics. And Joe said, I am not mad about missing a show about analytics.
Yeah. Very interesting how this has went, because it used to be, Josh, this was your week off during the year. You took this week off because me and Joe need to get better at Dynasty. Joe specifically, he's awful. But things kind of turned a corner for Joe last year, and now all of a sudden he doesn't need to be on the show. But guess what?
His head went so big. He's like, I finished second last year. I'm good.
Yeah. We don't need him, because if I knew there was a show Josh wasn't missing, it was tonight's guest. And if you followed me for any period of time, you know that I've always said, if I have a Dynasty question, I go to Marvin Eloquent, and now you guys get to talk Dynasty with him. But specifically, I think Marvin's maybe favorite part of Dynasty. We're breaking down some analytics tonight. Marvin, welcome back to No Punt Intended.
Thank you, man. I'm excited to be here. I love being on a show with both of you guys, but the topic is one of my favorites. I love talking about Dynasty. I love talking about analytics. So I really appreciate you guys having me on.
This might be our first analytics focused show ever, Josh.
I honestly might be. Yeah, it might be.
Well, we couldn't ask for a better guest. I'll remind everybody, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Maybe you're too shy to do it right now. You're going to very much enjoy this show. It's going to take us about an hour to get through it, but you're going to hit that button eventually. If you happen to be listening on Apple or Spotify, Pull or Tiffy for Joe Zolo, hit that follow button. We do offer super chat. I'm going to be honest. I like to be honest with people. You're not going to need it tonight, but if you want to throw us a few bucks, you can jump to the front of the line. And if you want to talk fantasy football when this show is over, jump into the Discord. We don't just talk Dynasty, though. We talk plenty of Dynasty, but we also talk redraft fantasy football. We're talking fantasy baseball right now. Josh is going to drop the link for that Discord into the description. Well, it's already in the description. He's going to drop it into the chat. It is time to get into Dynasty analytics. And Marvin, honestly, I'm just going to kind of let you take over here. What are kind of the most important analytics for football and specifically for Dynasty fantasy football?
Yeah, I know we're going to walk through a handful of metrics here today, but I when I first started to dabble in data and analytics for Dynasty football, the reason I wanted to do it is because it allows us to compare players and provide context on a player's career trajectory and compare them against each other, right? I think it helps us define that baseline of what is a good player, what's an elite player, what's a not so good player or prospect coming in. And I remember one of the questions I wanted to answer, this was years ago when I started writing and doing some of this, is we see rankings and players and tables out there all the time. And when you see someone that's ranked wide receiver 2 or RB3 or tight end 2, what does that actually mean in the context of history? And one of the things I always say when I start to write about Dynasty or talk about it is that not every ranking is equal. So not every wide receiver 2 every year is the same. And so we have to keep that in mind. And, you know, sometimes it might be a weak class. It might not be an elite prospect. They're just forced up there. And maybe, you know, this running back class would be a good example of that. And so it's again, analytics is just a tool. It helps us paint a more complete picture. It's not everything. It's not the complete picture, but it's one of the tools we can use to learn a little more about some of these players.
Yeah, one of the things that smart people like yourself do that I feel like for dumb people like me and Joe for sure, and to a lesser extent Josh, we don't watch college football. So when we hear a player is so and so good, Marvin, you do this all the time, like where you guys will give us the context of like Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson and Garrett Wilson to say where Carnell Tate matters and where Jordan Tyson matters. And I think that's so helpful, because if there are those of us who didn't watch every single down that Mekhi Lemon played, we can get an idea of what he profiles as and where we could maybe expect him to fall. Obviously, there are hits and misses as with everything, but I think that is a really cool way of looking at it. What would you say are some of the biggest fallacies surrounding analytics?
Yeah, I love this question because I think there's a lot of ways where analytics could be used, maybe just not incorrectly, but I don't know what the right word is, but I think there are times when we can use it and it doesn't quite tell the full story. I think there's this misconception that more is better in analytics. When you try to take 50 metrics, it's an exaggeration, but let's say 10 or 20, and you try to dump it into a model or use it to filter on players. I think there's this concept called overfitting, that when you start to use too many metrics that are too similar, you start to erode the predictability of whatever you're trying to do. And so for me, my models, my process, I don't use as many metrics. The most important one is draft capital. Really, if you use draft capital as a starting point, that's a pretty good spot to begin with. And then you start to peel the onion, right? You start to just find the layers and start to dig into other metrics. And then the most important thing to keep in mind here is that analytics is not meant to be final. It's not absolute. There's not one metric that tells the full story. So when you see out there someone talking about one metric and your favorite player might not rank highly in it, that may not necessarily be a negative. It just means that it's one piece to the puzzle, and then you can start to look at the other perspectives, the other layers, and start to paint that full picture. It's a tool. It's something that's supposed to help us, but it's not perfect by any means.
And I know we're going to get into players and specific metrics, but I think a small example of this is Carnell Tate and the 40 times at the combine, because everybody lost their mind. But then they went back and compared him to like Amon-Ra St. Brown and other elite wide receivers who didn't hit those 40 times. And the real lesson that came out from the thread I was watching develop was, you've already said it, draft capital, draft capital. Draft capital.
Yeah, I want to point out something really quick, because and this was the biggest reason why I wanted to put in this question, Marvin. I think it was probably a month or 2 months ago, and I saw a stat, a metric that a well-known person in the industry was kind of coming up with, playing with, and I sent it over to you because I wanted to get your thoughts on it. And your response was quite literally, "This is my problem with some of these new metrics. Sample size."
Yeah, 100%.
And that's what it boils down to.
Yeah, I think there's so many great metrics out there. So many sites have unique metrics, but we'll talk about this in a second. But like, one of the things we need to keep in mind is you want a big enough of a sample size to understand if it's a good metric. And if you only have 2 years worth of this data, 3, even 4 years, it may tell you something, but you don't know I wouldn't say for a fact, but you don't know if you go further back, 10 years from now, is it a good metric or not? And I try to at least have at least 10 years of data to do that. And that gets a little tough because metrics like in PFF, they only go so far back. Yards per route run is a metric that I really want to incorporate and use, but sometimes it only goes so far, right? Up to like, I think, 2018, 2019, maybe a little further. So that's just something to keep in mind. Not to say that those metrics aren't great, because there are some that are really good. And I can't wait until we have a little more of a sample size, but that's just something to keep in mind with some of these metrics too, when you see them out there.
No, I love that. We were working on a thought experiment over at Football Guys recently, and someone showed like all of the first round wide receivers in the last X amount of years and was trying to determine who were bust and who weren't bust. And something you said, Marvin, is the last 2 years sample size is so small. That same way, I feel like it's so hard to judge wide receivers over the last 2 years of their career and say whether they're bust or not. Like, I am someone who still believes in Marvin Harrison, probably to a fault. Whereas like other people want to say like, no, he's a bust. I'm like, he can't be a bust yet. Like, he's not even done with his first contract. Let's let this thing play out a little bit. So,
yep, I'm with you though. I'm still hopeful for him as well.
And to Josh's point into this follow-up point then is, how can we responsibly use analytics in fantasy football?
Yeah, we touched on some of it already. I think being consistent with your process and having a purpose with what you're trying to do with it is important to understand what is the goal. Are you trying to improve the hit rates? Are you trying to be more predictive than draft capital, more predictive than a metric? I think that's what you need to anchor yourself to if you're trying to look at analytics and as you're building out a process. And then most importantly, evaluate both the hits and misses as you develop your process, because the misses tell you just as much as the hits when you're looking at some of these players. Already mentioned using a holistic data set with a full sample size. Don't exclude players. I think that's really important when you're evaluating prospects. Use all drafted prospects, let's say, over the last 5-10 years or so. Don't just look at a specific subset. Don't exclude day 3 players because they tell you something as well. And then the most important thing I think is to really apply context when using analytics. Try to understand what the metrics is trying to tell you. Why does it matter? Maybe try to understand why a player may not grade as highly in a specific metric. And then this might maybe surprise some people, but I definitely think you need to use it in tandem with film, because I don't think analytics will tell you everything. You still need to watch, at least some of the film, and that'll tell you if what you're seeing in the analytics is accurate in some ways. And that's how I use this, actually, is to your point. I think you had a great point, Ryan, where we don't have the time to watch every single snap of college football.
Yeah.
So what I do is I look at analytics to tell me, okay, who pops based on a handful of metrics. And then from there, I start to look at the film.
Yeah.
And because you don't, if you want to try to watch film for 50 prospects, I mean, if this is your day job, that's awesome. But for some of us, it's not. And so if you just want to look at a handful of them, look at the analytics that tells you where you need to point your where to look at, and then from there start to dig into those prospects that stand out.
Yep. I want to throw Hoove up on the screen. I think this is a great question. Hoove is one of the contributors here at Club Fantasy and big Dynasty guy, loves Dynasty. He asks, is 3 years too small of a sample size when we tend to track league trends in 3-year windows around the league?
I think league trends, I think that's fine. I think 3 years tells you a lot. And I kind of look at, when I look at success in the NFL, I look at only I look at the first 3 years, because that tells you a lot. After that point, if someone hasn't hit in 3 years, that tells you a lot already, because they're probably not going to hit down the line. But I think for college football, when there are hundreds of prospects coming in, that's where I think 3 years might not be enough. You might want to look a little further. Maybe 5, I think, is a good number, maybe even more, because then that really tells you if a metric is helpful, if it's predictive or not.
Marvin, I think you're forgetting about the great Devontae Parker 5th-year breakout syndrome, right? Like, come on, man.
Yeah.
It takes 5 years sometimes, dude.
Oh, 100%.
It takes 5 years to have one good year and then suck again. I mean, and fall into oblivion, but it wasn't great.
It's still a hit, though. It is still a hit. He broke out.
He did break out. That's true. Broke out. Definitely not a blip on the radar. All right, Josh, any follow-up questions to analytics before we move on and start talking about positions?
No, I'm looking forward to the positions, because Marvin really broke this down, and there are some similar traits with each position that I find really interesting, and how it can kind of, weight and contribute to each position group. And then there's things like when we get to the tight end position where I'm just like, okay, so it's basically the same as throwing wet paper on a wall and seeing what sticks. Okay, cool.
Yeah, you guys obviously didn't hear this before the show. I gave all kudos to Josh and Marvin for the most well put together show sheet I've ever seen. I had nothing to do with this show sheet, folks. I literally am reading it to be a good host. I'm going to throw in my 2 cents when we get to the player parts of it, but Josh and Marvin killed this. Let's get into the quarterbacks, Marvin. So obviously the most important position in football, and in most dynasty leagues these days, certainly as we pivot to Superflex, the most important position in fantasy football. What are some of the most important metrics when we are looking at dynasty quarterbacks and evaluating these quarterbacks coming in?
Yeah, I think there's more than what I'll ever mention here, but I think some of the ones that I look at and found helpful was college breakout age for quarterbacks. There's a couple ways to measure this. A Player Profiler has its own metric. I'm sure other sites have as well. I look at it as the first season with at least 8 adjusted yards per attempt, so an efficient season with a minimum of 100 pass attempts, to see, do you break out as a passer? And among most metrics, this one has one of the highest correlations behind draft capital. And the threshold I look for is age 19 or less. it improves hit rates for first round quarterbacks from around 59%. The hit rates for quarterbacks isn't super high in the first round. It improves it from 59% to 78%. So when you start to look at these guys that break out early, you do put yourself in a sample size that does fairly well. The other metric I'll call out here is college rushing yards market share. Again, we're predicting fantasy football, and what scores a bunch of points? Rushing yards, rushing touchdowns. And so the most athletic and mobile quarterbacks grade highly in this metric. And I'm going to shout out an article that I read from Tej Seth from Summer Sports.
It's actually pronounced Sumer Sports.
Sumer. Oh, okay. Well, perfect.
I found that out from the great Lindsay Rhodes. She corrected me on that the last stream I was on with her.
Hey, thank you. They did a study on combine metrics and quarterback success in the NFL, and their metrics like broad jump, 3-cone, they correlate really well. And it makes sense, right? The most athletic quarterbacks, they're the ones that tend to break out because they produce those rushing yards. And if you look at all the quarterbacks that have broken out in the NFL since 2013, a 15% rushing yards market share in college is typically a good threshold. That's the average. Anyone above that, those guys have a 77% hit rate in the first round. So again, I keep mentioning first round because the other metric that really matters here is draft capital, especially for quarterbacks. What's interesting when you look at this is among the top 5 picks since 2013, they have a 71% hit rate. Top 10 picks, it's a 68%. I mentioned the average is around 58%. So those are already higher. It's a 60% hit rate for picks 11 to 15. And then anyone picked outside of the top 15 picks from 15 to the end of the first round, it's a 25% hit rate. Oh, wow. So it tells you that teams do tend to draft fairly well. They draft the best prospects early. In most cases, I know we've had a couple of busts in those top 5 picks, but for the most part, they do produce for the NFL. And so that's something to keep in mind as well. So those are some of the metrics I look at for quarterbacks. It's not the end all be all, but those 3 I think I've found are pretty helpful for evaluating prospects.
I don't think they're coming up, but I love that pick 15 and beyond. I think back to that year where it was the Kenny Pickett and and Malik Willis and my guy Ritter.
Desmond Ritter,
yeah. And we all freaked out that the NFL didn't want any quarterbacks. Well,
now we know why.
They were all picked after pick 15,
but you know what though? The lone one that hit, Mr. Lamar Jackson, pick 32 the first round.
There you go.
Yeah. Jordan Love.
There you go.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
All right. So now that we've talked about these specific metrics, let's talk about the quarterbacks who fit into this mold. And Josh, just so we can hear your voice a little bit more on this show, why don't you go ahead and read these lists for us? Let's talk about some of the quarterbacks over the years who've kind of fit into these molds, Josh.
Yeah. So as Marvin mentioned, the college breakout age, kind of looking at age 19 or earlier. So, 17-year-old freshman, 18-year-old freshman, that kind of thing. A few guys on this list that Marvin highlights: Justin Herbert, Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams, Marcus Mariota, Trevor Lawrence, Patrick Mahomes, Deshaun Watson, 9 himself, JJ McCarthy, Trey Lance as well. But a couple of non-first rounders who also check this box: Jalen Hurts, my guy with the Eagles, and Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant. So I found that pretty interesting.
Now, Marvin, when I look at that list of names, it's very clear all of them but one on this specific list popped for fantasy. So let's start this thing with what went wrong with Trey Lance. Is it the level of competition that everybody kind of wanted to point to when they were looking for something wrong with him?
I think that's a big part of it. I mean, he had some ridiculous rushing metrics overall. Even some passing numbers really popped for him. But I think it's the competition. That's one thing that's really important is when one thing I found that helped my process out quite a bit is when I started to incorporate conference strength and strength of schedule, because you start to see that the guys that play in the SEC, those players, I mean, they play against some of the best players, best cornerbacks, best, you name it. If they break out, that typically holds more weight, and you start to see that. And Trey Lance, I mean, we know he didn't play in the FBS, and so that does play a part in it. And so that's why I think when you adjust for strength of schedule, you can discount his production a little bit. And provide, again, more context, right? It's just one metric, but this helps you provide more context where these other guys played in much tougher conferences on better teams. And when they broke out, it holds a little more value than what we saw maybe for Trey Lance.
So I think the biggest thing for me when it comes to Trey Lance, I like your point when you're talking about, strength of schedule, competition, that kind of stuff. Obviously coming from the FCS, that plays a big part. Like you don't see a ton of FCS talent that pops off the screen on NFL Sundays, right? Well, but let's also not forget he had 12 career starts, 14 career starts.
Yep.
Right? He had one good season, and then the very next year he played 1 year, and then the FCS canceled their entire year because of COVID.
Yeah.
So it became he basically this giant enigma going into the NFL draft. Obviously, all the talent in the world, but then falls in a Kyle Shanahan system. So now the expectations are through the roof. And then we as fantasy managers just salivate because A, the rushing upside, and B, Kyle Shanahan. We love a Kyle Shanahan offense, right? So, yeah, we all got sucked right into this one, and why none of us saw it coming because he had 12 fucking starts. I don't know. But also, too, none of us learned our lesson when we applied this same logic to Anthony Richardson, which we'll talk about here shortly.
Yes. I just look forward to Trinidad Chambliss finally graduating and us never having to talk about COVID years or any of that shit again. God, what a run it has been. Yeah, Lance was a tough one. Now on the other end of this, I did like Lance a lot, and it was because of rushing upside. I remember watching Justin Herbert film, and I loved what I saw from him, Marvin, and it seems like the analytics really told a story with him as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, that's where you think about him as a passer. He was pretty good in college. That's why he broke out fairly early. But even the rushing upside I thought was there, right? I mean, you saw glimpses of it, and we see it now in the NFL. Like, he's not a Lamar Jackson level rusher, but he's more than capable. And so again, I think it's that's Justin Herbert, I think, was, if I remember right, he was a little more polarizing, but I think a lot of the metrics pointed to him being a decent prospect. And so again, to your point, he looked good in college, metrics kind of lined up, and here we are.
I had the pleasure of writing with the fantasy footballers at the time during that draft. And I said at the time, because of the arm strength, he reminded me a lot of Mahomes, and this was right when Mahomes mania was happening. And I was like, with that arm strength, I was like, who in the world wants Tua more than Justin Herbert? And it took a few years, but man, I didn't take a few years. It took like 5 games, but man, did I look right.
Yeah, I found it interesting. Like his junior year, no, not his junior year, his second season, he missed like 7 weeks of the college season, but he averaged 10.3 yards per attempt.
Yep.
Like, that right there just shows you how big of an arm he has. He averaged over 8 yards per attempt over his career in college. But Marvin, to your point, what you were talking about with the rushing upside, the lasting image that we have of Justin Herbert in college, 3 rushing touchdowns in the Rose Bowl, leading Oregon to the win. How does that not translate to the NFL? It's exactly what it did, right? But the knock that Justin Herbert gets in the NFL is he can't win the big game. We don't care about that for fantasy. We just want him to fucking sling it and run in touchdowns, right? So he's working out that way.
I say what I really liked about this year was we finally started to see some of that rushing upside. In his rookie year, we had the 5 rushing touchdowns, but he didn't put up gaudy numbers. This year, he almost had 500 rushing yards, which in the 2025 NFL was like the 3rd most by quarterbacks because QBs have stopped running all of a sudden.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, so I think it's clear where those guys fell at. Now we get into the rushing market share, and I love this because this is where fantasy managers sometimes get a little caught up. And honestly, the names you've given here have a similar hit rate, but man, are there some misses. Lamar Jackson, Johnny Manziel, Jaden Daniels, Deshaun Watson, Trey Lance again, Drake May, Josh Allen, Trey Lance, man. Like, you keep hitting all these categories. Oh. How did you fail? Caleb Williams, Anthony Richardson, Daniel Jones, Kyler Murray, Marcus Mariota, Patrick Mahomes, and Jackson Dart. I think first of all, you were kind enough to put numbers in here. Lamar Jackson with 49% of his team's rushing market share is bananas. But Johnny Manziel, I'm going to be perfectly honest. I was not part of Manziel mania, Marvin.
Mm-hmm.
I did not realize
not be after that freshman Heisman season, man. Oh my God.
I kind of went the other way. I hated him. Like I was like, no, we can't be hyping kids like this. Marvin, I did not realize how much he ran.
Yeah. I mean, this guy was, he was electric as a rusher. And that's where, you know, I thought it all pointed to, I mean, was it, I'm trying to pull this up. I thought he had like over
1,410 rushing yards his freshman season, over 2,100 in his 2 seasons starting at Texas A&M.
It's just absolutely nuts. And so when you see that, it's hard not to think that that can in some way translate at the NFL level. Unfortunately, it did not. But
turns out you have to like practice and watch tape and not do blow.
Yeah, exactly. There's again other stuff that can hinder your career, but from a college perspective, this guy was just looked like he should be a surefire prospect. And before we had Lamar Jackson, this guy had, for the decade that coming in, he was the guy that had the leader in rushing yards market share. He was that good, and so it's a bummer we won't ever see what could have been, but
yeah,
he was a good prospect.
Josh, do you think Cleveland was just the worst possible landing spot for Manziel? Do you think if there's another landing spot, maybe things work out, or was that just not in the cards for
I was going to say Cleveland definitely didn't help, but there was a reason it was called, he was Money Manziel, right? There was a reason it was Manziel Mania. Like this kid ate up the spotlight. And that's all he cared about. Like this was sort of like the boom in the social media generation with the influencers and all this kind of stuff. And that's really what Manziel cared about, was the cameras in his face, the microphones in his face, and putting it on so that he can get laid on a Saturday night. Like that's what his entire mentality was. So it's just really difficult for me to think that he would have succeeded anywhere else, because I mean, you just think about like, if this guy had gone to like a Kyle Shanahan offense, right? Like we know what Shanahan's offenses can do, but somebody like this isn't going to last with Kyle Shanahan. He benched Brandon Ayuk his rookie season, right? Yeah. Like he just doesn't deal with these types of egos and this whole like, oh, I don't need to, I'm God-given talent, right? Like there's so much more to being a quality football player, let alone a superstar football player. You've got to put in the work behind the scenes. There was nothing that Manziel showed on a daily basis that said he was anything more than, I'm talented, I got this. Yeah. But that's the problem, is you go from 130 plus team college pool all the way down to 32. So they take the best of all that bucket, and they put them in one smaller bucket. So that competition now becomes harder. You have to be more than just God-given talent.
Marvin, when we move on to Josh Allen, obviously the best quarterback in fantasy for many running years at this point. And this is probably just my old memory failing me, I don't remember the talk being his rushing upside. But this metric says maybe it should have been, and it certainly turned out to be his bread and butter in the NFL. I don't know that we've seen a rushing quarterback touchdown scorer to the level of Allen for as many years as he's continuing to do it. So,
yeah, no, 100%. And, when I look at his, I think the knock on him was right. He wasn't the most accurate passer at that time. I don't have the completion percentage in front of me, but I know
6%.
Yeah.
His last 2 seasons.
And I remember his last season was like sub 7 adjusted yards per attempt, was just not great. That's not the greatest season at all. And so that, I think that was part of the concern, but this is, I think, maybe also a testament. And when we look at prospects in general, like they can develop, and we clearly have seen him develop into not just a great rusher, but also a great passer. And there are multiple seasons where he's led in multiple passing metrics and also rushing metrics. Like he is, to me, I mean, what's a steal for Dynasty football? Whoever drafted him, I mean, this is a guy who will probably have multiple years still of this level of production, and has already given you multiple QB1 seasons. So
and he obviously hit the draft capital metric. It's just I think we all got a little nervous about Wyoming, the level of competition, things along those lines. And so, and then there's of course the I guess new public enemy number one at Club Fantasy, though at this point it's just beating a dead horse. Anthony Richardson, Josh, is whatever the opposite of a fan favorite is here for us.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of highlighted Allen and Richardson on the spreadsheet because I kind of wanted to lump them together a little bit, because when you look at their college profiles, like, they are really similar, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, incredibly inaccurate passers. You know, Richardson definitely did not have any kind of a peak passing season the way that Josh Allen did in his redshirt sophomore season. You know, throwing over 3,200 yards, 28 touchdowns. You know, and a lot of people tried to make the excuse for Josh Allen that, you know, he struggled in his junior year because all of his weapons left Wyoming, right? They either, you know, graduated, went to pros, what have you. A-Rich played in the SEC. So many people were like, oh, well, he can beat up on SEC competition. He can do it in the pros.
Yeah.
Well, first off, he didn't beat up on SEC competition. Let's stop that train right there. But again, it's the same argument with Trey Lance. He played one season in college. He came out as a redshirt sophomore. There is not one single redshirt sophomore quarterback that has come into the league that I can think of off the top of my head and has had immediate success outside of Mark Sanchez. And he was carried by a defense. You look at guys like Sam Darnold. How long did it take him to actually be good in the NFL? Redshirt sophomores need time. They need reps. They need experience. Anthony Richardson had none of that.
Yeah.
At all. That, to me, was probably the biggest of big red flags when you take out the rushing and the you know, completion percentage arguments, right?
Yeah.
Like, at least Josh Allen had 2 full years starting. He was 3 years on the same team. So, like, and again, he had a passing season over 3,200 yards. Anthony Richardson didn't even eclipse 2,000.
Yeah.
So, like, the fact that he went 4th overall is just front office malpractice, and I still don't know how Chris Ballard has a job.
Well, Marvin, let me pass this to you and try not to overthrow you like Anthony Richardson, and ask, with Josh comping Richardson to college Josh Allen, obviously he's not going to become Josh Allen.
I said there's similar buckets.
I said, that's why I said comping Josh. I didn't say that you said they were the same person. Is there still hope for Anthony Richardson, Marvin, if he ended up somewhere and got to learn? Or is this, you mentioned earlier in the show, if they don't break out by after their 3rd year, we're kind of done with them?
Yeah, you know, and what's interesting is at the quarterback position, we're starting to see these later breakouts now with Sam Darnold is one of the clear examples, right?
Yeah.
And so Daniel Jones, I know, had a solid season with the Giants, a QB1 season, but then for a while we thought, okay, his career's done, and then he comes back and has a great season with the Colts.
Baker Mayfield, I think, falls into that as well.
That's a perfect example. So this is where I think, being in the right system, being to Josh's point, having the time to develop, this might be one of the better outcomes for Richardson if he finds a new team and can just sit back and learn and just wait, because the athleticism and the dynamic rushing abilities is clearly there. He may just need some more time, and he's still relatively young. So he's not someone that I'm necessarily like trying to acquire in Dynasty right now, but you know, if you can get him as a throw-in in a trade, because he's not valued super high right now, it's worth the acquisition, because the upside we knew was there. It may just take a little more time, to Josh's point.
This is the pushback that I'll give on that. Darnold, Mayfield, who was the other guy that we mentioned? Daniel Jones. All 3 of them actually showed competency throwing the football in college.
Yep.
Anthony Richardson, outside of being able to throw the football the length of the field, can't do any of those.
Yeah.
That's a really good point, because if you look at metrics like completion percentage, over expected EPA per play as a passer, and all that stuff, he was towards the bottom every time he was a starter. And those are pretty good metrics that tell you a lot about a quarterback and his passing ability. And so that is definitely one thing that is concerning, and probably is more indicative of what we might expect over the next few years from him.
All right, let's wrap up quarterbacks with the important questions. Who are some younger quarterbacks that you think, based on these analytical profiles, are on the right trajectory to kind of pop for fantasy managers, Marvin?
Yeah, I'll mention two guys here. This is not the greatest quarterback class, so I'm going to mention someone from last year's class as well.
Yeah.
I'll mention, first of all, Jackson Dart. We already started to see the upside from him, right? A late first-round pick, so a guy that was picked a little later, but his rushing upside we saw led to multiple QB1 performances in his rookie year. He had 18% rushing yards market share in his college career, with 9.5 adjusted yards per attempt in the 83rd percentile. So solid, great rushing upside. And we've seen that translate to QB1 performances. Now, whether he continues to rush at the level that he did, we'll see. But he's someone I really like for Dynasty football, and is not really priced at that top 5 cost yet.
Yeah.
But he's someone who I'm really intrigued with. And then Fernando Mendoza is the other guy who is going to be the first overall pick. Did not have a perfect profile because he broke out a little later. We have more of a sample size with him, but his accuracy, his 69 completion percentage for his career is in the 93rd percentile. So a great passer there. And then again, he's the top picks, and he's going to a situation that I think is a little underrated. They may need to fix their offensive line a little more than they already have, but he'll have weapons there. And so I think there's some upside with both Mendoza, and then obviously Dart long term. I think he'll be a good fantasy quarterback.
And on the opposite end of that spectrum, who are some guys where they may end up being fool's gold and not the player you think they're going to be?
Yeah, Ty Simpson's interesting because, one, he's going to there's still question marks if he's going to be, he's maybe the only other guy that might make into the first round, but low rushing yards market share, a low passing percentiles, passing metric percentiles for him. So he's someone I'm not super high on. And then this one is maybe, low hanging fruit, but Shedeur Sanders, like when you look at his this is what's interesting, is because rushing yards market share includes sack yards as well. He had a negative 8% rushing yards market share for his career because he had a lot of negative plays that brought that down. Age 21 breakout age, ranked outside the top 40 in success rate and completion percentage over expected in his rookie year. I don't think anyone's really clamoring to trade for him necessarily, but if you have him and there's someone that's a believer and thinks he can turn things around for the Browns, I think you're better off trading him now. If you can get a second round pick, I think that's a win. I'm just not as much of a believer based on what we saw in college and then also in the NFL.
No, I kind of love that. I don't think dynasty managers are in a weird spot with Shedeur, though, as someone who drafted him a lot last year because of how cheap he was. I think the Dylan Gabriel draft pick made people just kind of give up on him, and I was able to land him as like a 4th round pick. If someone offered me a second right now, that'd be the fastest accept ever. I'd be like, yes, let's move on. And I can't move on from quarterback without giving Hoove what he wants. What are your thoughts on Tyler Shugg from an analytics perspective?
I have to pull it up, but I thought he had some good games where he was up there, and from a passing accuracy perspective and EPA per play, I mean, it wasn't anything like out of the ordinary. I don't know I don't think the Saints are necessarily in position to draft a quarterback this year, so I think he's going to have another year there. Again, I think it's all about, you brought up a good point. It's about cost and opportunity in Dynasty. And I don't think Tyler Shuck's going to cost you a lot, but he might have another starting opportunity this year. And so if you can acquire him and his value increases, that alone is already a win for Dynasty football. And you can always flip him later on if needed. So, I wasn't the biggest Tyler Shuck fan. He was an older prospect. You don't see those guys break out too much, but he saw enough from his rookie year where, again, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I thought he had some decent games in there.
In leagues I'm not in with Hoove, I acquired a lot of Shuck as well. And exactly what you were thinking there, Marvin, and I love that you said it. My drafting of Shedeur Sanders and Tyler Shuck was to flip them. Unfortunately, I have become a Tyler Shuck fan over the last year, and now I don't want to flip him, so I need to get off of that. And
Hoove's job is done.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I will say, I'll got throws out there. Fast Draft has like a rookie pool where you can. It's basically a best ball draft, but just with rookies. One of my best teams was actually with Tyler Shuck because he was my last pick in one of those. And man, he had multiple games where he was a starter, obviously, and he brought you 50 points. So hey, you can't complain with that.
No, we talk about that a lot on our DFS show about if you're the one who can get the last quarterback in like these playoff pools and you're right and they pop, you're probably going to win because you got to spend higher draft capital on better players elsewhere. And being the last one with the quarterback can work out. All right, let's move on to these running backs. And Marvin, we're just going to do this same exact method as before. Give me some metrics, some analytical metrics that you are looking for when it comes to evaluating dynasty and fantasy running backs.
Yeah, just 3 quick ones here. I'll share. College scrimmage yards per team play. So I mentioned earlier that the raw stats or maybe alluded to it, but raw stats don't tell you everything. So when you can adjust for the team and understand that sometimes, even though someone doesn't have 1,000 rushing yards or 1,000 scrimmage yards, they can still be a good player in the context of their team. So that's where yards per team play, when it's maybe not the most efficient team. It's not Ohio State. It's not Alabama. You can still be a good player, even though you're not racking up, the thousands of yards. Anything above 2 is elite, and that's one of the thresholds I look for. The other one is college experience adjusted production. This is one that I'll mention for wide receivers as well, where what we do in this metric, and this is one shout out to Campus to Canton. They're the ones that I saw first kind of popularize this metric. But what it does is it takes a look at every running back or wide receiver that broke out in the NFL. And then it takes a look at what they did in college in year 1, 2, 3, 4. What is the average amongst the metric for those guys that broke out? So the best running backs and wide receivers in the NFL, that becomes your threshold. And to no surprise, year 1, year 2, year 3, there's this like increase every single year because freshmen, you may not necessarily produce as much, but that's when you start to see that the early producers, that holds value. And so this metric, what I love about it is when you calculate it, it's either positive or negative. Like that's literally it. Anything above 0 is good. Anything below 0 is bad. And so that's why I think it's really helpful, because it does improve hit rates when you filter on those players that have a positive experience adjusted production. People use age adjusted as well. I think that helps. I found experience is just maybe a slight bit better, but either one works. And then the last metric I'll mention is college PPR per game, which sounds ridiculous, but if you're trying to protect fantasy points, they score a lot of yards and touchdowns in college. It pretty much translates. And again, I mentioned this concept of overfitting. You may not need to use all of these metrics, but using one of them with draft capital, using 2 of them with draft capital will tell you a lot about a player.
And that is going to bring me to the players. And Josh, I'm going to let you read the list again, but my goodness, what a list. There is one player on this list who I honestly cannot remember. The rest all did very, very well.
So let's look at scrimmage yards per team play. So these would be the top running backs drafted on days 1 and 2. So this would be looking at your first 3 rounds of the NFL draft. Jonathan Taylor. Giovanni Bernard, Christian McCaffrey, Ashton Genty, Dalvin Cook, Leonard Fournette, Terrence West. That was a different one. David Johnson, Saquon Barkley, Bijan Robinson, my king, Duke Johnson.
Yeah, I wasn't surprised to see him highlighted.
Breece Hall, Todd Gurley, Zeke Elliott, and Kareem Hunt.
It's a hell of a list outside of Terrence West. I'm going to be perfectly honest. I've been doing fantasy for a long time. Don't remember Terrence West even.
He was a Brown.
There you go. They ruined it. Marvin, I certainly remember Jonathan Taylor, and Jonathan Taylor just felt like that can't miss prospect for everybody who wasn't the Kansas City Chiefs and Detroit Lions, because what a mistake that was. But for fantasy managers, they never kind of wavered, and Jonathan Taylor was kind of always the pick there, but obviously there was some CEH mania as well. So
yeah, I agree. And that's where I think when you look at this metric, I don't know where CEH stands in this metric or even college.
All I know is CEH wasn't listed on this.
He's not. And I'm pretty sure he's further down the list. I don't think he even had a positive experience adjusted production. To me, if you look at this metric, the fact that Jonathan Taylor was leaps and bounds over everyone, he was the pick. And man, the guy was so dominant, one of the best true freshman seasons. I mean, and then he continued on to do his thing, and we're seeing it in the NFL. So, I mean, the fact that he sits at the top of this list probably told managers a lot, and it makes sense why.
I was going to say, it makes this
they
list
love him, right?
really, really good.
Yeah,
I was going to say, I literally highlighted him specifically to say, remember the great CEH or Jonathan Taylor debate in Dynasty? just because
Ridiculous.
one of them landed in, quote, a gold mine of a land spot. Yeah.
That's why draft capital isn't everything. You gotta use other data points to fill the, tell the whole story. And Jonathan Taylor, even with that early second round capital, was always a better prospect than CEH.
And that's kind of where I was thinking is like, don't just, you have to have the context of it. We're talking about the 32nd pick versus the 36th pick. Like, it's not that big of a deal, folks. Like, Kansas City went up and got their guy. It didn't work out for him. Josh, I'll just give you a few minutes here. Duke Johnson, what a fucking guy.
Look, I had to. Look, I see Duke Johnson on a list. I'm highlighting him, and we're talking about him
twice.
I do have a few pieces of sports memorabilia. I have a signed Duke Johnson Miami Hurricanes jersey. It is one of my favorite prized possessions.
Yeah,
but this is what I find so amazing when you look at the laundry list of great Miami Hurricanes running backs that have come out. Frank Gore, Willis McGahee, Clinton Portis, Edgerrin James. There's been plenty more. I mean, even Lamar Miller to a degree. Like, he was a great Miami Hurricane, had a decent NFL career. Duke Johnson is the career leader in rushing yards amongst the Miami Hurricanes.
Interesting.
He is second behind only Edgerrin James in rushing yards per game. That tells you how talented this kid was and really is. I mean, I know he's not playing anymore, but he came off a broken leg where he had over 900 rushing yards in 8 games, and the next season rushed for 1,652. The kid is fucking good, yet the NFL said, you know what? You're only going to be a change of pace back. But you know what? For 5 straight seasons, we got 62 or more targets. This kid was a PPR goldmine, and I'm so mad that he landed on shitty-ass teams in Cleveland and Houston, and they said, we're not going to use you that way. And I'm just
Marvin,
like, really?
I think I just came up with a new metric for you. This is going to be really simple. If you're at all good with spreadsheets, I think it's going to work really well. You just create a column that says, was drafted by Cleveland ? And then if you click yes, it takes them off of your list and you have nothing to be worried about. You don't have to worry about them anymore.
You know how I said don't delete guys from your sample size? Well, we might have to make an exception for guys drafted by the Cleveland Browns.
Yeah.
Nick Chubb is the only one that has stood the test of time, apparently.
Yes.
That's true. And hopefully I'm wrong about their 2 guys this year, Quinshawn and Harold Fannin. I like both those guys. When we get into the experience adjusted production, again, the list is great. It's a lot of the same names from previous. JT, Leonard Fournette, Ashton Genty, Christian McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, Todd Gurley, Saquon Barkley, Duke Johnson, Bijan Robinson, Giovanni Bernard, Breece Hall, David Johnson, AJ Dillon, Terrence West again. Good Lord. I have to go after the show. I will be reminding myself who Terrence West is. And Kareem Hunt. And then what is worth noting is Jahmyr Gibbs, Devon Achane ranked very highly in this, but there were concerns about their size. A guy who there wasn't concerns about his size, AJ Dillon. So Josh, you highlighted him. I'm gonna let you jump in here first, and then I'll let Marvin counterpoint you.
Yeah, I remember when AJ Dillon was coming out. Marvin, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe he went to Boston College, correct?
He did, yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought. But like, I remember this kid coming in and just being this, massive force in the ACC, and because of his size, people were kind of dubbing him as like the next Derrick Henry. But this guy's hip movement was like a drunk hillbilly at a hootenanny. Like, the guy could not move his hips at all. And even when he got to Green Bay, like, he played sort of this like 1B role with Aaron Jones, like, and his yards per carry every single year, just going right on down. Like, there was no steady pace of anything. It was just like, all right, I'm going to take advantage of this. And then the next season just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And then, he suffered the hip injury, ended up in Philly as a backup last year. And I know he just recently signed somewhere and I can't remember what it was, but like, to me, like, this is kind of a really good example of, you look at a player who obviously dominated in college because this team didn't really have anything else. And this is one of those instances where I wish I would have remembered this instance when I was talking about my love for Caleb Johnson last year, because he did amazing at Iowa. And then, of course, comes into the NFL last year and They just said, yeah, you're not that good. Well, maybe he's the next AJ Dillon.
I mean, at least AJ Dillon had some yards in his rookie year. Where
true.
Caleb
Johnson, he had 3 straight
mean,
years with from years 2, 3, and 4 with over 178 carries each season. So
yeah, exactly.
Really, God, I have written AJ Dillon just out of my memory.
I don't think he ever had more than 800-900 yards though. Just it's pretty average.
And then Marvin, let's flip these into useful things with fantasy drafts coming up, dynasty drafts coming up. What are some of the running backs in this upcoming draft, or one of the running backs in this upcoming draft who kind of falls into these numbers the way you want him to?
Yeah, so I mentioned experience adjusted production being fairly predictive when you look at guys that just had positive, right? They exceeded 0. Jeremiah Love is the only running back in this class with positive experience adjusted production. Wow. The only one. And looking back historically, you've had at least 2 in some of these classes that weren't even that good. Last year we had, I think, over 5. I want to say 8 was the number that I looked into. It was a pretty good class. Compared to this one, we only have 1. And Jeremiah Love, to me, I think checks all the boxes. He's one that grades, for me, in the 95th percentile in my process. He's good. And so he's someone who you don't really have to overthink. Outside of that, I mean, it's really rough. I'm not super optimistic about this class. I think landing spot will maybe change that a little bit. I think Jonah Coleman to me is really interesting. He grades well in some of the metrics, efficiency metrics, but the one that checks the most boxes for me is just Love.
In one of my dynasty drafts or dynasty leagues, someone just joined the league and has the 101. Mm-hmm. And they went back and saw the history of trades of the 101. And they put up an example of the year Bijan Robinson was coming out. And the guy got like a haul for the 101. And I was looking forward to asking you this question. Is Jeremiah Love worth the haul that people were paying for Bijan Robinson?
If we just had to compare the 2 prospects, I'd say no, because Bijan was, to me, a tier above Jeremiah Love. Like, he checked more boxes. He was the guy that broke out early. He was the one that was, consistently good, dynamic, explosive, checked draft capital box, athletic box. I mean, he was someone that I think was just more of a complete prospect when you look at it from an analytical perspective. Yeah. But with that being said, Love doesn't rank too far behind him. So if you wanted to trade a haul for him, I think you will probably get a good prospect. It's just, again, to me, analytics is about probability. If I had just compared these 2 prospects, looking at Bijan coming in, I just felt more confident in him breaking out. Jeremiah, I think he'll break out too. I'm sure he'll have a very successful career. I just felt better about Love coming in, or not Love.
I was going to say, you're talking about Love in a 95th percentile, and he was like, you know what? But he's still a tier behind Bijan. Like, damn.
Because he's 99th percentile. Yeah. That's how good Bijan was.
99.9th percentile.
Yeah, exactly.
99.
The opposite of that would be the guys who we're going to get too caught up on when Kansas City trades up and drafts some. Who are the people we should be slightly concerned about based on analytical profile in this upcoming draft class?
Yes, 2 guys I'll mention quickly. Mike Washington Jr. is one that I think after his combine performance, obviously had an elite combine performance. He's moving up a lot of draft boards, but he had an age 23 breakout. He broke out in year 5, but it took him that long to break out. He has a 21st percentile experience adjusted production. He's not someone that I would want to draft super early in my rookie drafts. So just because when you look at some of those metrics I mentioned, you don't see a lot of guys that check or rank that low in those metrics that end up breaking out. And so again, analytics is it's about probability. And when I look at Mike Washington Jr., I think of a guy who comps to other players who really haven't broken out, or a group of players that have a very low hit rate. So again, is it impossible that he's going to break out if he lands on a team with clear backfield and open backfield? No, he could break out. But I'm just looking at him as a prospect, and I don't feel as good about it when you compare him to some of the guys that have similar metrics as he does.
I think that's fair. And Emmett Johnson
is one that I think has a good receiving profile, but again, a later breakout. And so when you look at how he performs in some of these metrics, it's fine. It's not great. But again, we talk about this class being weak, and I talked earlier about not every RB2, RB3 is created equal. I think Emmett Johnson and even Mike Washington Jr. are two guys that are being pushed up as like a top 5 back potentially in this class, but they don't compare to the other top 5 backs that we've seen in last year's class or the year before. It's just because this is a weak class, we're starting to move some of these guys up. And so I just, just temper expectations is all that is.
I love that. I want to keep the show moving because I let everything run a little late. I will remind everybody, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. I see a ton of you are watching over on X. Be great if you jump into YouTube and just hit that subscribe button real quick. We'd very much appreciate it. If you happen to be listening on Apple or Spotify, hit that follow button, and you can always join our Discord if you want to keep talking fantasy. We're going to keep this train moving, Marvin. Wide receivers, talk to me about the metrics you're looking for.
Very similar to yards per team play for running backs. Receiving yards per team pass attempt is one of the best metrics I've seen. And why I like this metric is because it accounts for the fact that there are wide receivers out there that may not have a bunch of receiving yards for the season, but it's maybe because they were on a run heavy team, and this kind of adjusts for that, or the team ecosystem. What matters and what we've seen is the guys that were focal points or dominant in college as receivers in some of these metrics tends to translate into the NFL. The other metric, again, is when you start to adjust for experience, it's experience adjusted production. When, like I said, you look at the guys that broke out, you adjust that as a threshold, and it's either positive or negative. And just to show why I think this helps is because in round 1, wide receivers hit at like a 50% rate, a little over 50%. This improves the hit rate to 70%. So again, it's not perfect. Wow. It's not a metric that tells you everything, but at least it filters the sample size on guys that are more likely to hit because they dominated in college. And so that's another good one. And then the other one that we've seen around is yards per route run. And it makes sense, right? Considering efficiency on limited opportunities tends to highlight even some of the best players that maybe were in crowded wide receiver rooms, allows us to identify players who were maybe just didn't get those opportunities. And so the other metric I'll highlight is QBR rating when targeted. It's very similar to yards per route run, but both kind of tell the same story of efficiency does matter in college.
And then you have a note in here that I don't know what this means. Declare status matters?
Yes. So declare status is if you're an early declare, you're someone who still had some eligibility in college and you went into the NFL early. What we find is when you filter on draft capital and declare status, so early declare guys who, let's say they were in college for 3 years and then they went to the NFL, that group in the first round with high production tends to have a pretty high hit rate. So when you filter on that, and even in the second round, you improve the hit rates even more if you were to filter on early declare guys. And it intuitively makes sense because if they declare early, it's probably because they had a successful career in college and they said, you know what, I'm going to go in the NFL because I've accomplished everything I need to in college. It kind of correlates in some way like that, but we tend to just see higher hit rates with early declare wide receivers.
Josh, break down some of these great players for us, because what a list with some names I haven't heard in forever. But then Marvin also did us the very fun thing and gave us some of the notorious misses from these as well. So
we're looking at college experience adjusted production, the day one wide receivers that are in the 90th plus percentile average a 75% hit rate. And this list kind of mirrors that.
Yeah.
Demaryius Thomas, Des Bryant, Amari Cooper, CD Lamb, AJ Green, Julio Jones, Jamar Chase, Tedero McMillan, Odell Beckham Jr., Calvin Ridley, Malik Neighbors, Garrett Wilson, Devonta Smith. I have not read off a single bust here, people. This is ridiculous.
Yeah. Great stuff.
Oh, wait, but here's a couple misses. Corey Davis, Rashad Bateman, Treylon Burks, and the infamous N'Keal Harry. Fun fact, Stephon Diggs leads all day 3 wide receivers in this metric since 2010. So thank you for that, Marvin. That's a good note. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Josh, I'm just going to get to the point here. Why is Corey Davis highlighted? You just want to
I mean, look,
pour more dirt on the man.
Again, wanted to kind of highlight some of the lesser known people, or not really lesser known, but like the guy. I mean, Corey Davis was the 5th overall pick. This is a pick that should have hit. I don't remember Corey Davis ever having a 1,000-yard season. He certainly never had one in Tennessee. That is wild. But again, he's a guy that went to a smaller school. I believe he went to Western Michigan. Yep. So now we're looking at kind of the similar things that we saw with like Trey Lance, for instance, right? Even Josh Allen to a certain degree. that small school production. Is that an issue? Corey Davis had 3 straight years over 1,400 receiving yards in college. That is some massive production when you're looking at the wide receiver position. And he stayed for all 4 years. It wasn't like a, 3 and out kind of what Marvin was initially talking about when it comes to declare status. He was a senior. He did all of his damage and said, all right, I'm out. But now you look at quality of the class. The top 3 wide receivers in this class were Corey Davis at 5, Mike Williams to the Chargers at 7, and speed merchant John Ross at 9. And a couple of the other guys that went in this draft, and there's some pretty notable names. Kenny Golladay had a couple of decent seasons, signed a big, flop of a free agent contract with the Giants. Juju Smith-Schuster had some really good seasons as a 1B in Pittsburgh. Chris Godwin, we know how good he's been. And, of course, Cooper Kupp. One of the greatest wide receiver seasons of all time.
Yeah.
Fun fact, though, about Cooper Kupp, for as great as he's been, only 2 career 1,000-yard seasons.
That's wild. Yep.
Yeah, right?
They're on PPR volume.
Yeah. So, but those 3 guys, Davis, Mike Williams, John Ross, those were the first-round picks of this draft. And so really, like, when you look at the class as a whole, like, it was an okay class, but it wasn't great all told.
Yeah, and there was no can't miss guy, that's for sure.
Exactly. So then it becomes we're wide receiver needy teams just taking, the best college production and all those kinds of things, which I wanted to specifically highlight this because of this current wide receiver class. It feels pretty similar in a sense of it's top heavy. There's some okay depth, but I feel like these wide receivers are getting pushed up the board because the rest of the classes in the positions, or the rest of the positions in this class, aren't very strong. So just throwing that out there as an opinion, as somebody that, does look at a lot of numbers.
Before we get into another player, Marvin, I'm going to let you counterpoint that. Is this as bad a class as Josh is worried it might be?
I wouldn't say it is. But I can see how there are similarities because there was this group of guys that, back in 2017, there's a Corey Davis class. They just didn't, the reason why that class was just not that great was because a lot of them didn't check the boxes you look for. Again, this is why you filter on declare status, because Corey Davis wouldn't even be on that list.
Yeah, I was going to say, I love that.
Yeah, but that class, I'm just looking at my evaluation and what I had in that model. Corey Davis, even though he played in the FCS, or not FCS, not in a Power 5 conference.
I say the MAC disrespect going on in tonight's show
is he just was absurd as a producer. But outside that, there was really no one that really stood out. No one else in my process was in the plus 90th percentile. The next guy up, and it wasn't even based on draft capital, was Juju Smith-Schuster. And he had a couple of decent seasons. He was my wide receiver 2 in that class. Then was Mike Williams. Cooper Kupp was one of the highest 3rd round grades in my model in the last 10 years. I love
Cooper Kupp.
Cooper Kupp was awesome, man. And so John Ross was way down there. It's just Kenny Golladay was way down there because they didn't check the production box.
Yeah.
Corey Davis just feels like he was just one of those outliers. To your point, he should have hit. It just never happened.
Yeah.
This class, though, there are guys that check the production box from, Mekhi Lemon, Carnell Tate being in a crowded wide receiver room. Again, the reason why you adjust for conference strength and strength of schedule and the team, because Carnell Tate grades very well when you account for that. And then Jordan Tyson gives me a little bit of just like, a flashback of like guys that were not in those stacked conferences but he produced on a team that didn't have a lot of competition, but he grades fairly well there. It's the injury concern. So I think I wouldn't compare it quite 1-to-1, but I can see the concerns because there's not one in this class that grades for me in that 99th percentile where I'm like, that's a Jamar Chase. I feel good about it. And that kind of was in some ways the same of this outside of Corey Davis. 2017 was just not that great of a class.
Yeah. And speaking of Josh, much like Jonathan Taylor was the metric king.
Yeah.
Jamar Chase kind of makes this the case for this because what Jamar Chase did, we hadn't really seen.
Yeah, and this is what I find interesting because, you put Jonathan Taylor in the same bucket with Jamar Chase. Jonathan Taylor did this for 3 straight seasons in college. Jamar Chase did this literally 1 year and said, bye. Like he had one good, his freshman year, he had 313 receiving yards. That was it.
Yeah.
And then the national championship run, Joe Burrow, Chase, Jefferson, 1,700, 21.2 yards per reception and 20 touchdowns. And then came the COVID year and said, I don't need to fucking play. And then comes out as the 5th overall pick. So, like, for as much as experience matters at the quarterback position, it probably doesn't as much at wide receiver when you just have talent like Jamar Chase has.
Well, I think that goes back to Marvin's metric about declare status. Experience doesn't matter. It leaves some of that experience on the field.
Yeah. I mean, when you have 1,700 scrimmage yards and 20 touchdowns, he's like, yeah, I'm too good for this. See you guys later. I'm going to the NFL.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. And then as we move on to yards per route run, again, it's a great list. Hollywood Brown, Jalen Waddle, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Jamar Chase, Devonta Smith, CeeDee Lamb, Marvin Harrison Jr., obviously we're waiting on. And then we get into some of the busts we talked about previously. Rashad Bateman, Treylon Burks, obviously going back, Malik Neighbors, who doesn't look like a bust, Chris Olave. You have day 2 and day 3 wide receivers who rank near the top of this list. T. Higgins, another one of Josh's guys, Deontay Johnson, A.J. Brown, my guy, Wan'Dale Robinson, Joe Zolo's guy, Ladd McConkey. I'm going to go back to this, Marvin, and ask you the same kind of thing that I asked you about Trey Lance. What happened with Treylon Burks? He seemed really good. Smart people really liked him. Shout out Britt Flynn. It didn't work at all, Marvin. What happened there?
Yeah. I don't know. I know there was some
we're all
concerns about, like the conditioning and things like that. It just really seemed like he
fought boars.
Exactly. that's
does
the
not
metric.
Qualify.
That's it. That's what you look at.
It's not a quality in a fantasy wide receiver, Ryan.
Oh my gosh.
I should have known.
Yeah. Well, and the interesting thing with him is even though he ranks well in the raw stats in that class, right? He ranks near the top. Chris Olave shows up on this list, but Drake London isn't on here in the top percentile. Garrett Wilson is not. But when you adjust for strength of schedule and conference and team adjusted market share and all of that stuff, you start to highlight some of the best players. And Treylon Burks, when you adjust his production for all the things I mentioned, does not grade as highly in my production career score. That's where Garrett Wilson had the better score. Chris Olave, Drake London, they had better scores. And so that's why he pushes down a little bit. With that being said, he was a 94th percentile guy in my process. And I was hoping he would break out eventually, but he just happens to be, one of the few guys that will be outliers, right? There's so many things that impact some of these wide receivers and how they perform in the NFL, quarterback play, the system fit, all that stuff. It didn't work out. And it's a bummer because I was a big fan of him coming in.
I had a struggling dynasty team last year, and I'd held on to Treylon Burks this whole time, which is why it was a struggling dynasty team. But when Washington picked him up and he came off the pup, I put him into my lineup and won my first game of the season. So that became my go-to, is that I was undefeated with Treylon Burks in my lineup.
Oh my God.
So
that one-handed catch though, man,
that was sick.
Yeah,
there you go. That's his breakout.
And that just goes to show you, like, the kid has talent.
Yeah,
but like landing in Tennessee wasn't a good situation. Quarterback play in Tennessee was absolute dog shit, and he couldn't get healthy.
Yeah,
but he also wasn't a very refined route runner in college either. So
Washington liked him. They brought him back. I'm real interested to see how it plays out. And Josh, of course, Deontay Johnson makes the list, and he's fast turned into what could have been.
Oh man, you're not kidding. I loved him at Toledo. I thought he was fantastic. But I mean, really, like those first 4 years in Pittsburgh, he had a really solid 4-year run where he was one of the top target earners in the league. But the problem was the Steelers consistently had quarterback problems, and that never allowed him to elevate his game. He never had a year over 11.5 yards per reception. Yeah. And for as good as we're talking about guys in the route or yards per route run metric in college, he didn't have a single year in the pros over 2 yards per route run. So again, like situation, quarterback play, all of that stuff still matters as well, even though Deontay Johnson for a long time was a really good wide receiver in the NFL.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Now, Deontay, I always found interesting. I hated when he left Pittsburgh because it just seemed like that was the fit for him, and leaving wasn't the right move, plain and simple. So, and as we've been finishing these categories up, Marvin, we're looking at this upcoming draft class. We've mentioned kind of the names that everybody knows, but give us some names that are on the right trajectory because of that profile.
Yeah, I already mentioned some of the top wide receivers in this class, but I'll say Jordan Tyson leads the class in experience adjusted production. Not an early declared wide receiver, so that's maybe not that's one area where he doesn't check that box, but his production ranks really high. It's in the 90th percentile. First round capital is probably there for him, and I know injuries is the concern, but if you're looking for a guy with a wide receiver one production profile, it's Jordan Tyson.
Okay,
the other guy that ranks a little lower on some draft boards, and I think I don't think he's a sleeper because he's still in close to that first round ADP, but Elijah Surratt is someone I really like. I think analytically he's one of the better wide receivers in this class, one of only 3 wide receivers in this class with positive experience adjusted production. Those guys tend to have higher hit rates. He's wide receiver 4 in this class in yards per route run, behind only Mekhi Lemon, Eric McAllister, another sleeper in day 3, and Jordan Tyson. And he's the wide receiver 1 in this class in quarterback rating when targeted. So I know he's one of those guys where he doesn't have the most flashy plays, but he just gets it done.
Yeah.
And so the fact that he ranks so well in these metrics, even though some people knock him for not being super flashy, super athletic, I think this tells you a lot that he may just be one of those reliable guys that will be one of those safety blankets for a quarterback. And I think draft capital will be there. So I'm a big fan.
Ryan, this is your new Keenan Allen.
I was going to say, we talked a lot about Cooper Kupp on this, and I was kind of hearing a lot of that there.
He's going to be your new Keenan Allen. Elijah Surratt, like watching him at Indiana this past year, he's got some good tape. He's like, they really kind of used him as that like power slot, like the big guy in the middle. Silky smooth. He really does run some clean routes.
And then, of course, where there's good, there's bad. Marvin, who are we looking at that could be the fool's gold in this class?
Yeah, 2 guys I'll mention is Denzel Boston out of Washington. He's moving up in draft boards. He's probably a first-round guy, but he's in the 27th percentile in experience-adjusted production. Would be one of the lowest production scores by a first-round wide receiver in a long time.
Wow.
And this is since 2013 or 2010, sorry. He played alongside Rome Odunze in his first 2 years. We know that, but it took him another 2 years to break out after Odunze left. So it's still a later breakout. His yards per route run, right? When we talk about efficiency, maybe not getting the opportunities, but maybe you're efficient. It's 37th percentile for him. So not the greatest overall production profile. Just makes me hesitate a little bit, even with that first round capital. And then the other guy I'll mention is Zachariah Branch, projected day 2 wide receiver, only 35th percentile experience adjusted production, 38th percentile yards per route run. Again, one of those guys that is just doesn't project super well and compares to guys who just haven't hit in the NFL. And again, it's about probability. Yeah. These guys can break out in the right situation, but I'm looking at it and they just don't compare well to guys that they compare more closely to guys that didn't succeed in the NFL, which is just concerning.
I'm going to throw 2 more names at you because who threw them at us? Jeremy Bernard and Chris Bell. What do you think about these guys?
Yeah, I think they're both interesting. I think Chris Bell is one that I like quite a bit. I think he's
the kid out of Louisville, right?
Yeah, I'm going to confirm that. Yes, Louisville.
Yeah.
And I think
he was the knee injury kid, right? The ACL tear late in the year.
I believe so. And I think he has a production profile that isn't the greatest, but you did see that 4th year breakout was pretty strong. In the borderline 80th percentile. So some good traits there. I think Jeremy Bernard is one I'm not as big of a fan of. I think his efficiency metrics were a little better than his experience adjusted production. But again, these are 2 guys that maybe don't check a lot of the boxes, but you're one that you start to look at landing spot, especially when these are day 2 guys. Maybe the quarterback situation is a little more favorable than some other guys that land in this spot. Yeah. But I think there's intriguing aspects to both wide receivers.
All right. We move on to the ugliest position in fantasy football. Year in, year out, the tight ends. And it gets even harder with the rookies, though we had some really nice rookies this past season. Marvin, kick this whole thing off with the metrics you are looking for when it comes to dynasty and fantasy tight ends.
Yeah. Like I said, sometimes in dynasty, you just need to keep it simple. And there are two things that I look at for tight ends. It's best season receiving yards per team pass attempt. So the same metric where I said it adjusts for team ecosystem. You may not be in a pass heavy offense, and then, but you may still be a focal point of an offense. And I mentioned this because Iowa has a bunch of good tight ends coming in. They did not rank very highly in raw receiving yards, but when you adjust for receiving yards per team pass attempt, you start to see some of these guys. Exactly. And you start to see Sam Laporta rank highly in this metric. When you adjust for team market share, George Kittle actually had one solid season, right? So when you look at this is why best season matters, or top season, is because it doesn't matter as much when they had their elite season, is what I found. It's more that they actually had one dominant campaign to begin with.
Okay.
And so that's one metric I look at. Athletic measurables is the other one. I mentioned we talked about this a little bit with 40 time for wide receivers. You look at the top guys in 40 time for wide receivers, and there are a bunch of names that you're like, what did they do in the NFL? For tight ends, though, it's a little different. You start to see there's a stronger correlation to 40 time, the height and weight adjusted speed score, and the most athletic tight ends tend to succeed in the NFL, which makes sense because they're playing against a bunch of linebackers, maybe safeties who aren't maybe the fastest guys. And if you are athletic at the tight end position, it makes sense that you might have an advantage there, and you're starting to separate yourself, especially as a receiver. And so you do start to see some of these most athletic guys that also check the production box. They tend to be the best tight ends in the NFL.
And speaking of those tight ends, Josh, let's break some of them down. It's quite a list here with names that have hit and names that haven't hit.
Yeah. So looking at day 1 and day 2 tight ends, 90th percentile or better in best season receiving yards per team pass attempt. The hit rate of this group is at 60%, while the average hit rate for day 1 and day 2 tight ends is only 37%.
Yeah.
So we're looking at guys like Harold Fannin Jr., Adam Troutman, my guy, Dallas Goedert.
Yeah.
Arguably the tight end 1 in fantasy football, Trey McBride, Tyler Warren, Kyle Pitts, Zach Ertz, Dalton Kincaid, Brock Bowers, Mark Andrews, Colston Loveland, Michael Mayer, Greg Dulcich, Jonnu Smith, the Arthur Smith guy himself.
Yeah.
Max Williams. That's a name.
Oh, man.
Yep. And tight ends who just missed the cut, Travis Kelce and Sam Laporta. Interesting names there.
Marvin, I remember the Trey McBride draft class, and it was something I talked to Josh a lot about. Was I noticed Trey McBride falling in so many drafts, and it got to a point where I was like, I swear I was getting him at like the 301, because what was happening is people were sitting at the 301 and not making a pick, and I just ended up trading up for that pick every time, because my thought process was he fit a lot of the things you wanted him to fit. And more importantly for me, he was the first tight end off the board. I don't care that it was later. The NFL spoke. He was the best tight end in the draft class. And you're just letting him fall to me. And as Josh knows, at being in dynasties with me, I have a lot of Travis Kelce. And my God, could the timing have not been better of the passing of the torch for my dynasty teams of Travis Kelce to Trey McBride?
Trey McBride was, to your point, even though he fell both in rookie drafts, but also in the NFL draft, right? His second round pick. He was a guy that was highly productive in college. Check the production box. He was athletic. I think he had like a mid 80th percentile height adjusted speed score. I mean, the only knock on him was that he wasn't a first round guy. And even then he was a 92nd percentile tight end in my process.
Wow. Really
good. And so, man, to hear that you got him in what is a 301, what a steal.
I was gonna say I got McBride, and I got him the next season in like one trade in our club dynasty league. I got him for Daniel Bellinger and like a 3rd round pick.
My God,
like dead ass. Like I'm like, that was probably the steal.
Not only did I feel like I stole him at 301, let's be honest, after his rookie year, he went down in value.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. And we see this a lot with rookie tight ends. Like they don't, I mean, granted, they have more so in the last few seasons, but they don't traditionally pop in year 1. Yeah. So whatever, spending that first round pick, early second round pick on a tight end always kind of felt like fool's gold, because by the end of that first season, you were like, why the fuck did I waste a pick on this guy? And then you're selling him at a discount for him literally to just pop the next season. So no, like I've got myself quite a few shares of Trey McBride as well, Ryan, in our Ballers and Friends Dynasty League. I've got him, Travis Kelce, Tucker Kraft. Like I'm sitting on a tight end gold mine in that league.
I gave you Travis Kelce in that league.
To be fair, I gave him to you first.
One of the worst trades ever, but that's a problem for another day.
But I think, again, kind of looking at the small school product, right? Colorado State was where Trey McBride went. And when you're looking at production at smaller schools versus, your bigger conferences and stuff, sometimes you're projecting a little more than you ultimately want to, which again probably led to falling into the second round, obviously dipping in dynasty drafts. But when you look at the overall tight end class that he was in, Chigakonkwo, Jake Ferguson, Isaiah Likely, Cade Otton, Greg Dulcich was in that class. Like there's names there, but there's not a lot of big time production. So really, this tight end class wasn't that good either.
Yeah.
And now let's play my favorite game of asking Josh, why did you highlight Adam Troutman?
Again, looking at a smaller school product at Dayton. Like you look at Dayton, PFF doesn't even have, they have one season of him and he played 3 at Dayton. You look at Pro Football Reference, they have 0 because it's Dayton. Like you've got to a deep dark web dive to find this guy's stats. But he was a really good blocker in college. He did peak in his junior season or his final season there at Dayton, but never had over 1,000 yards, but was considered one of the better tight ends, at least offensively speaking, in that particular draft class. That was the same one that Cole Kmet got drafted in. And I was like, oh, this guy's going to be a pretty underrated guy. I think he's probably one of the top 2 tight ends in this class. And you got him for a 3rd, 4th round pick in most dynasty drafts. And he's literally become a blocking tight end in the NFL. And that, to me, is the biggest issue with the tight end position, because they're asked to do so many things. Somebody could be a really good offensive prospect, but if they're really good as a blocker, teams are going to pigeonhole them. Plain and simple.
Which leads us to our next list. We got the day 1 and 2 leaders in the height, weight, adjusted speed score. So we're looking at OJ Howard, Kyle Pitts, Noah Fant, Evan Ingram. I almost said Evan Green. I don't know where my brain was going there. Evan Ingram, Mike Gesicki, Luke Musgrave, Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, Eric Ebron. What a name. Luke Schoonamaker, Vance McDonald, Cole Kmet, Elijah Arroyo, Dallas Goedert, Terrence Ferguson, Sam Laporta, and Tyler Eifert. And I think OJ Howard is kind of for years, until we got Kyle Pitts, and obviously he's kind of broke out now. OJ Howard was kind of like the cautionary tale, Marvin. Like, he was the reason we were all terrified to draft rookie tight ends.
Yeah, because he did not. He was the athletic guy, but he didn't have that that production profile that made you feel really good about him as a prospect. I'm trying to pull him up, and I think he was like he was a 90th percentile guy for me, because again, athleticism matters at this position. So when you weight it all and draft capital, right, he was one of those guys that was in the 96th percentile for me. So I actually liked him quite a bit. The one thing I'll say is he didn't break out early, so that was one of the negative things for him. And I dug into OJ Howard way too long, like a couple of weeks ago, because he was one of my
every dynasty manager ever.
Because he's one of the guys that I think is one of the closest comps to Kenyon Sadiq, who's coming into this class.
Thank you.
He's one of the closest comps there, because Sadiq, we'll talk about him, doesn't check the box as a producer as well. But man, OJ Howard was the tight end 5 in points per game in year 2. It was only 10 games, but he was the tight end 5 in points per game. So when we talk about like a potential like upside, I mean, that is pretty good. Now, I think injuries derailed his career, and it's unfortunate we won't see like what that peak could have been, but tight end 5 is pretty good. Again, he's someone who checked that athleticism box and is like the testament of why, for unlike wide receiver and to some extent running backs, where athleticism does matter a little more, tight end, we care about these athletic measurables because it does translate into the NFL.
I'm so glad you put OJ Howard with Kenyon Sadiq in the same sentence, because I've been getting OJ Howard vibes from Sadiq since this whole process started, and I'm just like, God, I know I'm going to be sitting in some of these rookie drafts and I'm staring at Kenyon Sadiq and I'm going to have PTSD.
Well, the other guy that I have on that list is Noah Fant with Kenyon Sadiq. So it's not like this is the greatest list either, but
this is fair.
Not great.
Yeah, we'll talk about him. Yep.
And we kind of started the show with a punching bag, and we can kind of wrap up segments with a club fantasy favorite punching bag. Cole Kmet, Josh, why'd you highlight him?
I had to highlight him because we've spent so much time over the years just shitting on Cole Kmet. And really, it's because he had one season where he didn't catch.
I was going to say,
that's literally the only reason why we're like, Cole Kmet sucks.
One bad season, and how hard the rest of the fantasy community defended him. Because
that's honestly, it kind of just became like, you know what, everybody loves him, so we're just going to be like, you know what, fuck Cole Kmet. But like, I never held this much animosity for a year that Deontay Johnson didn't catch a damn touchdown.
No.
I'm like, it's a freaking quarterback problem, right? But you know, at the end of the day, Cole Kmet's actually been a pretty decent pro. Maybe not the best fantasy quarterback, but he's done well with the Bears, and he's been okay. Like Cade Otton, basically, right? Like Cade Otton's been good. He's had, you know, some highs, some lows. Obviously, Kmet's highs have been a little higher, but now with the presence of Colston Loveland, Cole Kmet's basically a blocking tight end by now, right? Like, and this is just kind of, look at that. Perfect.
Index to sus jumps in.
Like you can read my mind, right?
Yep.
But yeah, no, that's why I wanted to highlight Cole Kmet. But again, kind of like on the same train with the Adam Troutman thing, that was a really weak tight end class.
Yeah.
And the only other guys that mattered from that class, Colby Parkinson, who had like an 8-year breakout, and Harrison Bryant, who was actually the Mackey Award winner in that year in college, and then
draft and did nothing.
Really nothing. Yeah.
So I want to throw a throwback here, a comment that I was so happy to see. One of the Club Dynasty originators, Michael Sicoli, in the chat. And Josh, you had mentioned athletic tight ends who get pigeonholed into blocking. And he says Josh Oliver. And I'll never forget when Josh Oliver signed that like 3-year, $21 million contract. And I'm like, Josh Oliver, he does nothing. And the Vikings paid him to block and do nothing else. And that just, he was the extra.
Well, and we say that every year on our free agency show. It's like, be weary of these contracts that tight ends sign. Like Charlie Kohler signed for $8 million a year. A few years ago, Will Dissly signed for $8 million a year.
Yep.
Colby Parkinson, once upon a time, signed for $8 million a year. That's just the going rate for blocking tight ends, apparently. Yeah. So don't get fooled by those level contracts.
Every one of those guys better give Josh Oliver a piece of their deal because he's the reason. All right, Marvin, let's wrap up these tight ends with the most important questions. And you've already talked about the guy that everybody's wondering about. Who are the younger guys who do profile correctly?
I know I started off not talking too positively about him, but Kenyon Sadiq, I think is still on the right trajectory. I mean, the first run capital holds a lot of value because a lot of those guys tend to hit at least one season of tight end one production. He's a 99.9th percentile athlete, just based on how he performed at the combine. Amazing. This is where it's important again to adjust for strength of schedule, the conference, and the team that he was on, because even though he didn't grade as well in market share production, so even when you adjust for, you know, the other guys around him and stuff like that, the strength of schedule, he was on a good Oregon team. He still has a 78th percentile production score in my process. So it's not great. It's not elite by any means, but it's decent enough to pair with first round capital, 99th percentile athletic profile, that he actually ranks decently well for me in my process. He's in the 95th percentile. And guys that rank that high have a 94% hit rate in my process.
Oh my!
So that's why I think he might be getting a lot of just that negative
from Josh.
You know,
Trust me, I'm not the only one.
No, I get that, but I think when you look at him in total, there's still a little bit of upside. Do I think the upside is as high as like a Brock Bowers? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
But could he have at least one tight end one season, then fizzle away like, some of these guys? I think so. That may be the low end, right? I still think he's a decent prospect, but again, not elite by any means.
Yeah.
The other guy that I actually like quite a bit is Eli Stowers, who started his career at quarterback, is equally elite as an athlete, finished with back-to-back 90th percentile tight end seasons. And I think it was I can't remember who posted this, but someone had shared, like, if you look at him as a tight end who started producing, let's say we ignore his first 2 years when he was mostly a quarterback, he grades fairly well as a tight end. And really the biggest difference between Stowers and Sadiq right now for me is draft capital. If they had the same draft capital, Stowers would be really close to where Sadiq is in my process. He was efficient. He leads the class in yards per route run. Very similar in some ways to Harold Fannin last year, where didn't get the draft capital, but from a production perspective was just checked a lot of those boxes. So Stowers might be the better value of the two if you had to think about it from a dynasty perspective.
Ryan's spidey sense is tingling.
Oh, you're comparing guys to Harold Fannin.
Yeah.
And it sounds like I might be able to get him a little bit later in drafts because my taxi squad is all tight ends. I just let them sit there for 3 years and see which ones popped off. So.
Facts.
That's great. There you go.
And then Marvin, I love your answer for who should we be wary of because it's quite a list.
Inevitably, this will happen in any draft season, but there's going to be day 3 tight ends that get hyped up because they land on a team or they were, they did something in college that made people like perk up a little bit. But the hit rates for day 3 tight ends is 5% since 2013. 5%. Now, you do see guys that break out. Jake Ferguson was one of them, and he was actually highly productive when you don't look at raw stats, but adjust for, again, conference, team market share, checks that box. And then George Kittle, again, adjust for the Iowa offense, not being that great, decent producer, and was highly, highly athletic. So those guys are those are the ones I'd prioritize. Guys that were productive, who are highly athletic. Hit rates are a little better. It's still low. So just temper expectations. I don't think there's any day 3 tight end that I'm going to spend highly draft capital for. But if you were going to grab some guys late in your dynasty drafts, find the guys that were highly athletic, that were highly productive, because those tend to hit at a higher rate. But I think the hit rate's like 10%. So it's not like it's not going to be anything amazing. It's better than 5 though.
And what are your thoughts on one of last year's rookies, Mason Taylor, heading into his second year with the Jets?
Yeah, I actually liked him quite a bit. He was one guy that was kind of that mid 80th percentile for me. That hit rate isn't super high. The guys in my process kind of pushes up even day 2 guys into that 90th percentile that have the 94% hit rate. So Mason Taylor did not make that, but I think his athletic measurables were decent, if I remember right. From a production perspective,
I just remember he lit the combine on fire and everybody loved him after the combine.
That's right.
So.
Yes. And so he's someone that I like. Again, something to keep in mind with tight ends, even though we've seen a Brock Bowers breakout in year 1, most of those breakouts happen in year 2 and year 3. So don't abandon these tight ends too early. I liked your strategy. Stash them in your taxi squad for 3 years and see what happens, because it does take a while for some of these tight ends to break out.
Oh yeah. Like I said, there were taxi squads where I was like, oh, should I have Harold Fannin down here when I needed a tight end? Because I grabbed Hannon. I grabbed Aronde Gadsden. I grabbed Mason Taylor, and I just put him down there and forget about him. And then I'll be sitting there with no tight end and be like, wait, pay attention to your taxi squad. So do that too. If you see a rookie popping, you may have them.
I have one league where I've literally stashed Isaiah Likely for 4 years. Dead ass.
Might pay off this year. It might actually happen.
It might actually work.
Well, like I had Trey McBride and Mark Andrews for the longest time. So I'm like, well, I don't really need Likely on my main team. So I'm just going to keep him on the taxi squad. And I ended up trading McBride to get Bowers in a 2 because the other guy had lost Bowers in the championship. So I was like, fuck it, I'll take advantage of that. And so I'm like, well, now I've only got Bowers because I moved Andrews. So I'm like, all right, I'll pair Bowers and Likely. Now I can finally graduate him now that he's on the Giants.
Ready to move him up. All right, before we wrap up the entire show, shout out to Sick Nasty, who's been waiting about 15 minutes to get this question answered. I try to keep the segments cohesive, so I didn't want to go back to wide receiver when we're already talking tight ends. But how are we feeling about Garrett Wilson with Geno Smith in town. And Josh and I spent a little time on this a few weeks ago, or last week maybe, when Geno signed there, basically saying, no matter your thoughts on Geno, it's a definitely accurate upgrade for Garrett Wilson, and he's not afraid to force feed the ball to one person. So what are your thoughts, Marvin?
Yeah, I'm with you. I think volume matters, and he's going to get a bunch of volume. We've seen that regardless of who's there. Even with Devontae Adams, he was still, to some extent, a volume-heavy wide receiver. And the one thing that I'll maybe temper is that 15+ points per week that's like wide receiver one range, and we don't see a lot of wide receivers on non-elite offenses produce. But if there's one that could produce, it's a guy that doesn't have a lot of volume competition, and he's a really good wide receiver, great route runner. I mean, you can't say enough good things about Garrett Wilson. So I do think the upside is there. And I mean, we doubted him last year a little bit, and he had some good games. I mean, he was decent minus the injuries, right? I don't think he played a lot of games, but again, I think that could be the case again this year, and he's someone you might be able to get at a decent discount.
First off, how dare you say he doesn't have any competition when we literally just talked about Mason Taylor? Hello.
Oh man, you got me there. Yep.
No, yeah. I don't hate Wilson at all this season. I think 15 is a bit of a stretch, in all honesty. I think you're probably looking at more of a top 24 kind of season. So I would put him probably closer to the 10 to 12.5 point per game range.
Yep.
Zach Ritchie, big Tampa Bay guy. Pour one out for Mike Evans. All of our hearts are broken. I read today that he turned down a bigger contract from Tampa Bay to go play for San Francisco. So apparently he's ring chasing. One was not enough. I'm going to take this question to be, who's going to be the number one there, Marvin? Are we looking at Chris Godwin resurgence, or is Mika Ibuka ready to take over?
I still believe it's Ibuka. And I think part of why the Dynasty community may be sour on him a little bit is because of the way his rookie season panned out, where you see this a lot with rookie wide receivers, where it ebbs and flows a little bit throughout the rookie year. But it's actually the opposite, where they struggle early on and then they break out later in the year. The fact that it was the opposite for Ibuka kind of, it didn't sit well for a lot of Dynasty managers who probably held on, who had him, were really excited to have him, and they couldn't really play him in the fantasy playoffs. But what I'll say is Ibuka was a good prospect. And you pair that with what the upside that we saw last year, I think there's still that wide receiver one upside in his future. Now he has a clear path to volume. I think he'll be just fine. I think he's the wide receiver one there. Godwin's getting older too. I think he's going to be the guy.
Yeah. How dare you sleep on Jalen McMillan? What's the matter with y'all?
Oh my gosh.
I love Jalen McMillan, but I definitely glazed over him there. Oh my goodness. I cannot keep a show under an hour anymore, but to be fair, so many positions, so many rookies to talk about. Marvin, thank you so very much for the time you gave us tonight. Most importantly, I try to always do this at the beginning of the show because we go 90 minutes or 100 minutes. Tell people what you're working on, where they can find your work, where they should be following you. You've just given them 100 minutes of content of why they should be following you. So.
Well, first of all, I appreciate you guys letting me ramble for 90 minutes here. It went long, but I really appreciate it. This was super fun. And any articles I write will be on the Fantasy Footballers, and I'm taking a little bit of a break to start the off season, but I do rookie content. I share some of my models and my results over on Twitter. So you'll find it all there. And as always, like I love talking Dynasty. I love it when people reach out and just want to chat about these prospects. So I'm always open to that. And so reach out, let's talk Dynasty. It's always fun.
Oh, and everybody, Marvin is in the Club Fantasy Discord with us. So, if you're joined up and, just
join in, throw those questions in there. There you go.
There you go. Love it. That is going to wrap up the Dynasty. Welcome to Dynasty Analytics episode. The first time we've ever done that here at Club Fantasy. We're sticking with Dynasty. Next week starts our annual Stars of Tomorrow series, where we are breaking down every position, looking at these rookies, telling you what we think of them, telling you where we hope they land, all of that kind of fun stuff where we are guessing whether they're going to be good. We are going to have a ton of great guests. We are partnering with Dynasty Nerds to get you some of the best information. I imagine we're going to have some of them on the show. We're going to be sharing some of their work. It's going to be excellent. Make sure you tune in. We are back to Wednesday next week, I'm guessing, Joshua.
Yes.
So 9:00 next Wednesday. Maybe we have Joe Zolo. If not, you get to hear me. You get to hear Josh. You get to hear Dynasty Football. Always remember, defense wins championships. Offense wins fantasy football. For Marvin, Josh, I'm Ryan. Follow Club Fantasy at Club Fantasy FFL on all the socials. We will see you next week. Starts with tomorrow. Quarterbacks.